What is the relationship between cause and effect and non-Jewiship? Is there one? Well, if you subscribe to the philosophy that life is cause and effect, then it means that one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next things. So it means that there is no beginning to an action. So one thing leads to another. This is really beautiful. This is the freedom this is real freedom, this teaching. Because we all feel, or most humans feel, they're guilty. They've done something wrong or they're to blame. It's a relative human experience to feel these, but most people are really identified with it and experience it to a great extent. But there is nobody that's guilty. But it's also really full on, because it also means that's the same for mass murderer, paedophile, like whatever you really hate in this society. It's one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So there's no beginning of the action of the paedophile. And this is why there's so many great stories and films out there at the moment. Like, we're really getting into this concept in society, where a really great film doesn't just portray this big, bad, ugly monster in the film. It also shows the humanity of that person that does bad things, that there's nothing that's separate from it. It feels like there is a moment where we can choose to do things or not, but that's just an appearance, that's not an actuality. So you're presented with stabbing someone or not. I know that's quite dramatic, but it's not a personal thing. The stabbing person, the choice to do it. That choice that says, I'm going to stab them, has been a lead up of all events that happened to that point in time. So it's really important seeing that. So most of society believe in cause and effect, but they don't believe in non-Jewiship. But if you really reflect on cause and effect, there is no beginning and there is no end to any action. All action is one action, like an ocean, like a wave coming up. It takes all of those particles of water to get that wave to come up and then to break down again and then another wave to come up. And it's the same for all of this life. It's called like the butterfly effect. Like, this can only happen from the movement of all other things. It's beautiful. Yeah, karma, you could say, is cause and effect, because cause comes from effect. So to me, I always say that the karma is cause and effect, and some people argue that, but they say it's just effect, like it's the effect of someone's action, but the cause and the effect are the same. Like, it's like an endless line, and there is no personal karma. There isn't a person that is guilty. So sometimes the way karma is interpreted is that you have particular karma and you're guilty for that karma and you've got to free yourself from it. It's a helpful way to speak, to say that you have karma, but it's not actually yours. Your karma is all the other lives that came before you as well. It's not actually a personal thing. And then in this life, it seems to be, but it's not actually the way it is, that it's Beth's job to improve that karma. But all her improvements of it and everything that she does isn't her choices. That's also karma. The fact that she chooses to improve her karma is also karma. There's no free will. There's the appearance of free will. It's really intense, these things, because we're so conditioned of what good and bad is, and it keeps all of us in line. Like, there's nobody free of that. Like, if society took away all things that were good and bad, like that we determine as good and bad, like, what is it that you would do? You know, if it was taken away that it was bad to crash into someone's car and drive off and not give them money for it, and there was no concept that that was bad, would you stop and do that? It's not your choice at the end of the day, but it's conditioning. You're conditioned into believing that. So we have like a society, like and if you grew up and you were never conditioned that stealing was a bad thing, like in our society, we're not conditioned to grow up to believe that factory farming or what's it called? Non-fair trade products isn't bad. So we're not, my generation wasn't, the younger generation are being brought up to believe that's bad, but my generation isn't. So I know with myself, I try to recondition myself to not buy products that aren't fair trade. But it's not easy because I don't look at something instantly and then think about the suffering that's gone into that product, because I wasn't trained in that way. I was trained to see stealing as a really bad thing and littering as a really bad thing and being rude as a really bad thing. But these things like factory farming, I do have training in that actually to believe that is bad. But for me, fair trade, it's not a natural thing that appears in my brain when I'm shopping. But if we were brought up with that, then it would be like if any of us bought things that weren't fair trade, it would be like scandalous. It would be like robbing a bank or stealing somebody's wallet. It would just be like you're a supporter of cruelty. And maybe there's laws against it. Like if people do that in the future, maybe they get a fine or they get put in prison or something. And then that would become so demonized in our mind and such a bad thing. But at the moment it's not, so everybody just kind of does it. The same with being gay. Like 200 years ago, being gay was considered punishable in a lot of societies by death more than likely. Whereas now it's like, who cares? Get over it. Just the older generation that tends to care. Some of the younger generation as well. But we're getting over it. And so, you know, like 100 years ago, it was considered good to, you know, shout abuse at a gay person or for them to be tortured or something and them to be imprisoned, and everyone was like, yeah, that's good. And now everyone's like, oh no, you can't do that, it's not PC, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. And all of this is social conditioning. And if you take that off, like it's such a freedom to take that off and just see that there is no good and bad, and that one thing is just happening from another to another to another, and there is no good and bad. Good and bad is a human concept which helps us live as a civilization together. It doesn't exist in the dog world. Khaleesi's conditioned to know it's bad to do poo-poo in house only because it brings her pain if she does, like I tell her off. But it's not, she doesn't have this concept of it. Humans are deeply plagued by this idea of good and bad, and they feel this eternal guilt for being separate, that it's your choice to do good things and to be a good person. Whereas there is no good person. Like all of you that are thinking you're a good person, which Lisa has a tendency to dwell towards that, it's a bullshit. There isn't a good person. There is humanity, which is a flow of things. And if any of you had the right circumstances, I'm sure that you'd be a court killer or a paedophile or a murderer. And I know that's really hardcore because you think, no, I wouldn't. I've got free will and I've got choice. But I assure you, if you get stimulated in a certain way, you would be. If you've ever seen Clockwork Orange, like they try to recondition him into being good. It's the same for being bad as well, or doing bad things. And there's also people that are genetically born into this life that have more of a tendency to be bad, but that's genetics. It's not social, it's genetics, but that doesn't make someone more bad. It's just a different way of conditioning. I went off on that a bit.